For 40 miles, the same headlights stayed locked in my mirror. Same distance, same speed. Every move I made, it matched. I got the plate and called it in. The dispatcher went quiet for a moment before she answered, "This 1 year ago. And I'm going to tell you now." The car behind me had been there for 40 miles before I started paying attention to it. That's the thing about night driving. Headlights behind you are just part of the landscape. You stop registering them the same way you stop registering mile markers or the hum of the engine. They're just there, background, until they're not. What made me notice was the distance. 40 miles, and it hadn't changed. Not closer, not further. Locked in at exactly the same position in my mirror. 2 headlights, slightly wider apart than most modern vehicles, sitting at a fixed point behind my trailer like they were attached to me by a cable. I sped up on a clear stretch. The lights sped up. I eased off. The lights eased off, not following. Matching. I told myself it was another trucker keeping pace. It happens. But truckers don't drive like that. They overtake when they can, or they fall back when they're tired. They don't hold a perfect fixed distance for 40 miles on an empty highway at 2 a.m. without a single variation. I got on the CB, asked if anyone was running behind me on Route 191 northbound, static. Nothing. I tried again. Same result. The lights stayed exactly where they were. Around mile marker 220, I did something I'd never done before on a night run. I slowed down to 30 miles an hour on an open highway. Not gradually, suddenly, enough that anyone behind me would have to brake hard or change lanes to avoid closing the gap. The lights slowed to 30. Same distance, same position. Like whatever was back there didn't need to react because it already knew what I was going to do before I did it. My mouth went dry. I pushed the truck back up to 60 and grabbed my phone. I called the Highway Patrol non-emergency line and reported a vehicle that had been following me for 40 miles, matching my speed precisely, not responding to CB contact. The dispatcher asked for a description of the vehicle. I looked in my mirror. The headlights were there, but the vehicle itself was hard to read in the dark. Lower than a truck, wider than a standard car. Something about the shape felt old. Not vintage, not classic. Just old in the way that things get when they've been used past the point they were designed for. I told the dispatcher I needed to get a plate. I slowed again, this time to 20, and watched in my mirror as the vehicle closed the gap slightly before adjusting. For a few seconds it was close enough that my trailer lights caught the front of it. Dark-colored sedan. 2 occupants visible through the windshield, or shapes that could have been occupants. The light wasn't good enough to be certain. And the plate, illuminated for maybe 3 seconds by the red wash of my brake lights. I read it out loud to the dispatcher. She repeated it back. I confirmed. She said she'd run it and call me back. I kept driving. The lights kept following. For the next 20 minutes, nothing changed. Same distance, same position. Same absolute stillness in the way it moved that felt less like driving and more like being pulled along a track. Then my phone rang. The dispatcher's voice was different when she came back. Not alarmed, careful. The kind of careful that people get when they're deciding how much to say. She said the plate had come back registered to a 1994 Dodge sedan. Dark blue. I said that matched what I'd seen. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said the vehicle had been involved in a fatal collision on Route 191 northbound. I asked when. She said 3 years ago. Mile marker 190. I was at mile marker 228. I told her the vehicle was behind me right now, that I'd been watching it for over an hour, that it had been matching my speed exactly for 40 miles. She said she was going to send a unit to my location and asked me to pull over at the next safe point and wait. I looked in my mirror. The lights were gone. Not fading into the distance, not turning off onto an exit. Gone. The highway behind me was completely dark, the way a highway looks when there's genuinely nothing on it for miles in either direction. I pulled over anyway, sat there with my hazards going and my hands on the wheel, and waited for the patrol unit. It arrived 11 minutes later. The officer walked the length of my truck and trailer with a flashlight, checked underneath, checked the road behind me as far as his beam reached. Nothing. He asked me to describe the vehicle again. I did. He wrote it down without reacting, which told me he'd heard something like this before, or had been trained not to react to things he couldn't explain. Before he left, he said one thing that I've turned over in my head every day since. He said the collision 3 years ago had happened at mile marker 190. A dark blue sedan, 2 occupants, northbound. The vehicle had crossed the center line and gone into the barrier. Both occupants died at the scene. He said in the 3 years since, his department had received 11 reports of a vehicle matching that description on that stretch of Route 191. Always northbound, always at night, always following someone. He said they'd never been able to intercept it. I asked him what he thought it was. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at the dark highway behind my truck. He said, "I think it's still trying to get to wherever it was going." Then he got in his car and drove away. And I sat there alone on the shoulder, wondering what was at the end of that road, and whether it was the same place I was heading. 11 reports in 3 years. Same stretch of road. Same vehicle. Same behavior. Locked at a fixed distance, matching speed, never overtaking, never falling back. 11 drivers who called it in. And not one interception. Think about what that means. Highway Patrol knows it's there. They've been looking for it for 3 years. And whatever is on that road at night has been doing this long enough that the officer didn't even flinch when he heard the description. He'd heard it before, but here's what nobody's asking. 40 miles of perfect distance, perfect speed, perfect stillness. It wasn't following him. It was escorting him. The question is, to where? The rest stop was empty when I pulled in. Not quite empty, wrong empty. The kind of empty that has a weight to it, like the air itself is holding something back. 3 other parking spots had fresh oil stains, but no trucks. Whatever had been there had left recently, which meant I just missed company, which should have been a comfort. It wasn't. I'd been running since 4 in the afternoon. 14 hours of highway, 2 fuel stops, 1 food break that lasted 11 minutes because the place smelled wrong and I couldn't sit still. My body needed sleep badly enough that my hands had started feeling disconnected from my arms. That specific exhaustion that makes simple things feel like they require instructions. I parked, killed the engine, and climbed into the sleeper. The cab settled around me, metal ticking as it cooled, the faint creak of the suspension adjusting to the weight shift. Familiar sounds. The sounds that mean the day is done and nothing is required of you for the next 6 hours except stillness. I was asleep in minutes. What woke me wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The specific feeling of not being alone in a small space. If you've never experienced it, you can't manufacture it from a description. It's not a noise or a movement or anything the rational mind can point to. It's older than that. Something below thought, below language, that fires in the body before the brain has time to form a question. I was awake completely and instantly, the way you only get when something has already decided the situation is serious before you have. The sleeper was dark. I hadn't closed the curtain between the cab and the sleeper all the way, and a thin strip of pale light from the parking lot came through the windshield and cut across the floor at an angle. Everything else was dark. I lay completely still and listened. Nothing. No breathing that wasn't mine. No movement. No weight on the mattress that shouldn't have been there. The sleeper was exactly the size it always was, and contained exactly what it always contained. But the feeling didn't leave. It sat on my chest like a hand pressing down. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to make sure I knew it was there. I've slept in this cab for 7 years. I know what alone feels like in this space. This wasn't it. I reached for my phone and turned the screen on low. I swept the light across the sleeper slowly. Every corner, every surface, the storage compartments, the narrow space between the mattress and the wall. Empty. Completely empty. I pulled the curtain back and checked the cab. Empty. Both doors locked, both visors up, nothing on the seats, nothing on the floor. The windshield showed the empty parking lot, the dark tree line beyond the fence. A single overhead light on a pole, casting a yellow circle on the asphalt below. Nothing out there either. I lay back down. I told myself it was the exhaustion. I told myself 14 hours of highway, there's things to the nervous system that feel supernatural but aren't. I told myself all of it, and none of it moved the feeling off my chest. I didn't sleep again. At 5:30, when the sky had lightened enough to call it morning, I got up. I needed to check the tires before getting back on the road, standard routine. Something to do with my hands, something that would make the world feel like it had rules again. I climbed into the cab, unlocked the driver's door, and stepped down onto the first step. Then I stopped. I looked at the passenger side steps. There were 3 of them, same as the driver's side. Steel textured, designed to grip a boot in wet weather. I'd looked at those steps 10,000 times without seeing them. I was seeing them now. The bottom 2 steps on the passenger side were clean, normal. The way steps look after highway miles. Road dust, a little grime, nothing unusual. The top step, the one directly below the passenger door, had mud on it. Dark mud. Damp. The kind that comes from ground that doesn't get much sunlight. The kind of soil that stays wet long after the surface has dried. It was pressed into the textured surface of the step in a shape that took me a moment to possess. The shape of a foot, not a boot print. A foot. Narrow heel, the ball, 5 toe impressions, pressed clearly into the mud that had transferred onto the steel. Someone had stepped up onto that step with a bare foot covered in dark wet soil, from outside. Going up, the passenger door was locked. I checked it from where I stood without touching it. Still locked, the pin down exactly as I'd left it the night before. Whatever had put that foot on that step hadn't gotten in through the door. I stood there in the cold morning air, looking at that print for a long time. The mud was still damp. Not wet, damp, the way something gets when it's been exposed to air for a few hours. Which meant it had been put there during the night. While I was inside, while I was lying in the sleeper, certain I wasn't alone, and telling myself I was wrong, I took a photograph. Then I stood back and looked at the ground around the passenger side of the truck. The parking lot was asphalt, dry, no mud anywhere near the truck. The nearest soil was the verge beyond the fence line, 15 feet away. No trail leading from the verge to the truck. No other prints on the steps or the running board, or anywhere else on the vehicle. Just that one print on the top step, like something had come from the ground, taken one step up toward the door, and then thought better of it. Or been stopped. I got back in the truck and drove. I didn't file a report. I didn't call the depot. I just drove and kept checking the passenger mirror, the way you check something you know you shouldn't keep looking at, but can't stop. I've thought about the feeling that woke me. That specific ancient certainty of not being alone. I've thought about the locked door. I've thought about what it means that something got close enough to leave a print on that step and didn't get in. But what I think about most, what I can't find the bottom of no matter how many times I turn it over, is this. The mud on that step was damp at 5:30 in the morning, which means whatever left it had been standing on that step recently, not hours before I woke up. Hours after, while I was inside convincing myself there was nothing there. It wasn't trying to get in during the night. It was standing on that step in the early morning, watching me sleep, and when I finally got up, it stepped down. The door was locked. The print was on the outside, so whatever stood on that step in the early morning wasn't trying to get in. It already knew it couldn't, but it came back anyway. After he woke up, after he checked the sleeper, after he convinced himself he was alone, it was still there, standing on that step in the dark, waiting for him to stop looking. Think about that patience. The willingness to stand outside a locked door for hours just to be close to something sleeping inside. That's not predatory behavior. That's something far worse. That's longing. The diner was half full when I walked in. 6, maybe 7 people. 2 truckers at the counter, a couple in a booth near the window, a man alone at the far end, nursing coffee with both hands. A waitress moving between tables with the slow economy of someone who has done the same route between the same tables for 20 years. Normal. Completely normal. I took a stool at the counter, ordered coffee and eggs, and put my phone face down on the Formica. It was 2:40 in the morning, and I had 4 hours before my delivery window opened, and nowhere to be except here. The waitress poured my coffee without being asked. I wrapped both hands around the cup and let the heat move through my palms and stared at nothing in particular. That's when I noticed. The man at the far end of the counter was looking out the window. Not at anything specific, just out, toward the parking lot, with the fixed, unfocused stare of someone whose eyes have landed somewhere and stopped bothering to move. I registered it and looked away. Then I noticed the couple in the booth, both of them facing the window, not talking, not looking at each other or their food or their phones, just looking out at the parking lot with the same fixed, unfocused expression as the man at the counter. I looked at the 2 truckers. Both of them had turned on their stools to face the window. Neither was speaking. Neither was eating. Just looking out. The waitress was standing at the end of the counter with the coffee pot hanging from her hand and her eyes on the window. Every person in that diner was looking at the same thing. I turned to look. The parking lot was dark, beyond the reach of the diner's lights. My truck was out there. I'd backed into a spot near the fence, passenger side facing the building. I could see the outline of the cab in the darkness, the faint reflection of the diner's neon sign on the windshield. Nothing unusual, nothing moving. Just a truck in a dark parking lot. I turned back to the counter. Nobody had moved. Nobody had shifted their gaze. The waitress still had the coffee pot in her hand, still looking out, completely still. I said, "Excuse me." She didn't respond. I said it louder. Nothing. I waved my hand in front of her face. Her eyes didn't move. I stood up and walked to the nearest trucker and put my hand on his shoulder. He was completely rigid under my hand, not stiff the way a person gets when they're startled, rigid, like something that had been holding that position for a long time. His eyes were open and fixed on the window, and his chest was moving, slow, shallow breaths, but everything else was completely still. I backed away from him. I looked at all of them, 7 people locked in position, eyes on the window, breathing but absent in every other sense. Not unconscious, not asleep, something else, something I didn't have a word for. I looked out the window again, my truck, dark cab, passenger side facing the diner. A neon reflection moving slightly on the windshield as the sign cycled through its colors. Then I saw it. The passenger door was open, not wide open, ajar, maybe 6 inches, enough to show a sliver of darkness inside the cab. I had locked that door before I came in. I knew I had. I always lock both doors before I leave the truck, every stop, every time, without exception. The door was open. I went outside. The cold hit me immediately, and the silence hit me harder. No wind, no highway noise, nothing. The kind of silence that makes you aware of how much sound you normally take for granted. I walked to the passenger side of the truck. The door was open exactly 6 inches, exactly as it had looked from inside. I pulled it the rest of the way open and put my flashlight into the cab. Empty. Nothing on the seat, nothing on the floor, nothing in the sleeper visible through the curtain. The cab was exactly as I'd left it. except for the smell, damp soil, and something underneath it, something darker and colder that I felt in the back of my throat before I identified it. A smell of somewhere underground, the smell of a place that doesn't get light or air. I stood there with the flashlight, moving slowly across every surface, and found nothing. No mud, no marks, no sign that anything had been inside. Just the smell and the open door. I locked it, checked it twice, walked around the entire truck with the flashlight. Tires, undercarriage, trailer seals, the running boards on both sides. Nothing disturbed. I went back inside. The diner was already moving, not resuming, already in motion, as if the scene had been running without me the entire time I was outside. The waitress was midway through her route between tables, coffee pot in hand, the same unhurried efficiency as when I'd first walked in. The couple in the booth were talking quietly, the same low murmur as before. The truckers were eating. The man at the far end had both hands around his cup, exactly as it had been when I first walked through the door. Not similar, identical. I stood at the entrance for a moment watching it. The waitress reached the end of her route and turned back. The trucker closest to me cut into his eggs at the same angle I'd watched him use before. The couple laughed at the same quiet moment they'd laughed before I went outside. I sat back down at my stool. The waitress came to me without being asked and refilled my cup. Same movement, same angle, same expression. The automatic kindness of someone running a familiar sequence. She set the pot down in the same spot she'd set it before and moved away. I sat completely still with both hands around the cup and watched the scene run around me. Every detail in its place. Every person exactly where they'd been when I first arrived. The sounds, the movements, the specific gravity of a diner at 2:40 in the morning that I had already lived once tonight. Something had rewound it and pressed play, and nobody in that room seemed to know, or nobody in that room was capable of knowing anymore. I drank the coffee slowly, watching, waiting. When I set the empty cup down on the formica, the sound it made was very small, and every head turned to the window, all of them, simultaneously. The waitress frozen mid-step, the truckers with forks halfway to their mouths, the couple mid-sentence, the man at the far end with his cup suspended in the air. All of them looking at my truck. I put cash on the counter without counting it, stood up slowly, walked to the door without looking at any of them, and pushed through into the cold. I crossed the parking lot and got into the truck and started the engine before the door was fully closed. I pulled out of the lot without looking back. I didn't check the mirror until I was back on the highway. When I did, the diner was a small rectangle of yellow light behind me. Every face in every window was turned outward, watching me go. Still, patient, like they'd done it before, like they'd do it again, for whoever pulled into that lot next. The scene was already running when he walked back in, not resuming, already in motion, which means it didn't need him there to keep going. It wasn't waiting for him. It was waiting for whoever came through that door next. Think about how many times that loop has run tonight. How many drivers have sat at that counter, watched every head turn to the window, gone outside to check their truck, come back in and found the scene already reset and ready. How many of them drove away? How many didn't? But here's what nobody's saying out loud. The door was locked. The smell was inside the cab. Whatever got into that truck while everyone in the diner was looking, it was already gone before he checked. It left with him, and 7 people watched it go. Nobody told them to stop looking in the mirror. That's the part that stays. Not the vehicle that matched every speed change for 40 miles. Not the footprint on a step outside a locked door. Not a diner full of people frozen mid-breath, watching a truck that had something inside it only they could see. What stays is the fact that each of these drivers did everything right. They checked, they reported, they looked directly at what was wrong and tried to name it. And it didn't matter, because whatever moves on these roads at night doesn't need you to be careless. It doesn't need you distracted or reckless or half asleep. It just needs you alone, far enough from the last light, far enough from anyone who would believe you in the morning. That's all it's ever needed, and the road gives it that every single night. If these case files are following you into the dark, subscribe and turn on notifications. New files every week. 2 more videos are on the final screen. Both involve drivers who stopped when they shouldn't have. Neither of them made it to the next exit without looking back. I'm Morrigan. Keep your doors locked tonight, both of them.